stand up and walk around a little?
Uh-huh. Give me 10 minutes. Okay?
I can't follow.
Can you stay seated for 10 minutes?
Can I what?
Stay seated for 10 minutes.
10 minutes.
And then you can get up and walk all you want.
What's the 10-minute thing?
I was going to put on a pot of coffee for you.
So I'm going to wait 10 minutes before I can walk, but we can start. Okay. Well, welcome. We thought it might be nice if we just take the opportunity to fill in some of the empty spaces on the canvas about who we are, where we came from, how we came to be here, how we came to be Episcopalians, how we came to be married, all those how we cames. Then at some point in time, open it up for some questions and see if there's anything that we haven't covered that you would want to cover. We really lead pretty boring lives, so this isn't going to be edge of your seat stuff. I'll start just by going back to the very beginning. I was born in Wisconsin, spent half my childhood near Milwaukee, and the other half in southern Minnesota. So I grew up in the cold, and that being said, I'm still happy that I'm not in the cold this year. It's really cold back there. Grew up Roman Catholic. Went to a place called Holy Hill in southern Wisconsin. Anybody who has Roman Catholic background may have heard of that shrine. It's a large church on a large hill, and you can see 30 miles when you go up into the bell tower. When I was a little boy, probably 8 or 9, we were going across the big platform that goes into Holy Hill, which is way up on the hill. And we were leaving service, and my dad said to me after service, "Father Eric, how does that sound?" And I said, "Let's go play football." And I don't know if that was I wouldn't call it a self-fulfilling prophecy, but I don't know if those were prophetic words or not. Because obviously he was thinking Roman Catholic Father Eric, not Episcopal Father Eric. But nevertheless, those words came back to me when we went to seminary. And I'm jumping ahead a little bit, but when I went to seminary, my seminary was right near Milwaukee, Episcopal seminary called the Shoda House, which is a very small seminary in terms of number of people that attend. But I had the opportunity to go back and visit my old home where I grew up as a little boy, and then we went up to Holy Hill, and I remember walking across that platform. I thought, "Oh my goodness, this is scary." That many years ago he said that, and I can remember those words, and I was sitting right here, standing right here, overlooking the beautiful colors of the leaves as they were turning. So, after high school, I immediately joined the Air Force, and they sent me to Goodfellow Air Force Base to learn how to be an intel analyst. So I got a top secret muckety-muck clearance, and from there I went over to a little place in southern Italy called San Vito Air Station. It had no runway, it had no planes. All it had was this huge antenna. And when I say huge antenna, I mean they built a 9-hole golf course around half of it. It was a huge antenna. It was called a Flare 9. And this was the Cold War years. And so we used it as a ground intelligence site to intercept radio communications from other people. Not from U.S. forces, but from other folks. And it was there, you know, when I went in the Air Force, I left my family, I left my folks. My brother and sister are older than me, so they've been away from home for quite a while. And when I left home, I left my parents' faith with them. You know, I'd gone to church with them. As a dutiful young Catholic boy, I went to First Holy Communion, and I went to confirmation class, and I went because they took me on Sunday morning. We got up, we went to church, we came home. And then I went in the Air Force, and my faith was not my faith, it was their faith. And while I was at San Vito Air Station, southern Italy, that I began to, I guess, build a growing hunger and appetite for spiritual things, for who is God, what is this Christianity all about, and I began to explore. And through a series of events, I met a few people and became a practicing Christian. It was with the Church of God. Anybody here ever heard of the Church of God? There's several different branches. This one is Cleveland, Tennessee. I was talking with several folks before the first service, and we were talking about snakes. And I don't like snakes. And the Church of God of Cleveland, Tennessee is a Pentecostal group. And I say all that to say they didn't handle snakes. You will hear people who say they pass snakes out during service at some Pentecostal services. And I understand that really happens. And then somebody speaks in tongues and off they go. If you handed me a snake right now, I'd just ask you where you want your back door, because I would be going right whichever way you want it. But in all seriousness, it was a different expression of the Church of God of Cleveland, Tennessee, because we were a small microcosm of Americans in Italy. And we were Christians of Americans in Italy. And we went to church on Friday night because you couldn't have the chapel on Sunday because all the other chapel services met. So we met on Friday night. So now we're a Friday night service, bunch of Christians of Americans who are GIs in Italy. And you got to know that if you have a group of people that want to go to the chapel on Friday night, they're committed. Because there's a whole lot of other things to do in Italy on a Friday night other than go to church. So it was there that I really started to plant my roots and start to get into the Bible and start to study the Bible and start to talk with other people about the realities of God. And went back to the States. I'm skipping some things here. I'll let Sue fill in some of this. Went back to the States and tried to go to the college that was of Cleveland, Tennessee's Church of God School. And when we got there, we found out that the scholarships that they promised us were for kids coming out of high school, not people coming out of the military, so they took our scholarships away. So we didn't go there, because we couldn't afford to go there. And so I'm going to pause there, and I'm going to let Sue give you a little bit of background about her and get up to how we met.
Good morning.
Good morning. Good morning.
I'm not used to this sort of thing. I was a classroom teacher, and so I talked to a lot of people, but not with a microphone. So I was born and raised in Texas, north of Dallas, actually way out in the country. I only remember one home growing up. I think my parents moved there when I was 2 years old, and when I graduated from high school, they tore the house down and started all over. And eventually ended up moving to East Texas. Now they live in Tyler. So I went to the same school from kindergarten through high school, graduated with, I think there were 5 of us that started kindergarten together and graduated together. I was raised Southern Baptist. You know, being from Texas, that's what a lot of people do. My whole family was Southern Baptist, and I think I'm probably the only one of my family who ever questioned why that they wouldn't want to be Southern Baptist. So, you know, Texas didn't get into my blood, and I guess being Southern Baptist didn't get into my blood. But I will say that having grown up in a Southern Baptist environment, my parents, every time the doors of the church were open, we were there. And it was, you know, Sunday morning, Sunday night, Wednesday night. And one of the great gifts, I think, of the Southern Baptist Church is really focusing on the Bible. I knew the Old Testament Bible stories and the stories of Jesus growing up. And I think, like Eric, and probably like everybody in the room, at some point you have to decide whether you believe what you've grown up being taught, and is it real to you? And like Eric, I went into the Air Force straight out of high school. In fact, in October of my senior year, I signed the paperwork and knew that in July I would be entering the Air Force. I was trained as a Russian linguist, and I'll tell you just a little bit of going into the military. So, you know, you have to go to, in my case, I had to go to Dallas to do the physical and do the testing and that sort of thing. In high school, we took what's called the ASVAB, the basic aptitude test for being in the military. And it was a recruiter, an Army recruiter, that called wanting to talk to my sister, who was a year older than me. And I happened to answer the phone, and he said, well, you know, who are you, whatever, And I said, that I was a senior in high school. And he said, well, how about if I talk to you? And that's how the questions started being raised about going into it was an Army recruiter. And my family our next door neighbor was a retired Air Force guy. And he said, Susan, because everybody in Texas called me Susan. Susan. Got to draw that out. So he said, please, just go talk to the Air Force recruiter before you make a decision. Do whatever you want to do, but go talk to the Air Force recruiter. And so I did, and I ended up pursuing the Air Force because they would actually promise, if you were selected for a position, you would be trained in that position, and if you trained successfully, you would be in that position. So that's what I did. As I was going through the process, they said that I had scored high enough on the ASVAB to qualify to take an aptitude test for learning a foreign language. And that is the weirdest test I've ever taken in my life. It was called the VORC, and I don't know what that stands for, but it was basically a simulated language. They took rules and words from different languages and put them together just to see if you had the aptitude to learn a language. I had not even had Spanish 101. I spoke English, and by some standards, not even good English, being raised in Texas. So I took that test, and it qualified me to enter training. And so when I went into the Air Force, I became a Russian linguist, and it was 8 hours a day, 5 days a week of doing nothing but learning to read, write, speak, and listen to Russian. And it was by far the hardest thing I've ever done. I went on and finished a bachelor's degree and a master's degree, and it did not compete with learning Russian. So that's what I did in the Air Force. It took me a year and a half of training, a year of language, and then 6 months of the top secret training that went along with it. Also at Goodfellow, but not while Eric was there. And then I went, my first Air Force station was San Vito, Italy, which is where Eric was. You want me to keep on telling the story? So when you move to a new base, you are assigned a sponsor. A sponsor is the person that's supposed to meet you at the airport. They make your room arrangements. They show you around. They do the things that they need to do to help you transition comfortably into your new base. My sponsor happened to be Eric's roommate. My sponsor also happened to be irresponsible. I was a single airman coming in to the base. All he needed to do was pick me up at the airport and, prior to my arrival, secure a room on base for me. 2 things that he needed to do. He did neither of those 2 things. Now, fortunately, at the time, I was 19 years old, had never traveled outside of the United States, and there were like 4 or 5 of us that had graduated, that were being stationed in Italy. And so I said to them, hey, how about we meet up in New York and fly over, we go together. And so I think there were 3 of us that ended up doing that. One ended up with weather delays, and so he wasn't able to. But really, thank God I did that, because there was an American there picking up, somebody else that was responsible, picking up their person. And so he said, don't worry, I'll give you a ride to base. So of course we get to base, there's no room for me, and it's a Friday, which means there's not going to be a room for me until Monday. And so he takes me to a little hotel a ways off base. Now again, I'll remind you, I was 19 years old, had never been out of the United States. I get to my room, and it is 4 walls and a little wardrobe sort of thing to hang your clothes, and bed and bathroom. There's no TV. There's no nothing. I'm scared to death to leave my room because I don't have a great sense of direction. And if I get lost, I won't know how to find my way back to my room. It never occurred to me that this was a hotel that all Americans stay in. Everybody there probably was American and spoke English, but I was scared to death. So the other guy's sponsor said, I'll pick you up, I'll bring you to base on Saturday, we'll figure things out. So on Saturday he comes, he picks me up, he brings me to base, and he says, your sponsor is really sorry that he didn't pick you up. And tell him what he was doing.
What was he doing? I think he was playing softball.
He was playing softball. So he said he's very sorry that he didn't pick you up and that he didn't do what he needed to, but he lives right off base. And there are 3 guys, is that right? 3? That live in that apartment. And he's going to offer you to stay the night there because, and he said, you know, they're good Christian guys. You would be perfectly safe. And I'm thinking to myself, safe? I'm going. I'm not spending another night in that hotel. So he picked me up, brought me to his apartment, and what I remember, I don't know whether this is an accurate memory or not, but what I remember is being in the living room the next morning, and Eric walking by the hallway and looking in, and I was like, hi, I'm Sue. He had no idea that I was there. But so the second night that I was in Italy, that's when I met Eric in his house.
So I walk by the living room and I see her sitting in there. I said, do I know you? So that was what, February? February. And Sue was 19. And in August she turned 20, so I proposed because I wasn't going to get married to a teenager. And in October we were married. So things moved along pretty quickly once we decided that Sue wasn't scared about being in a hotel anymore. Where were we?
We were in Italy.
Yeah. We got married. We finished our tours in Italy. I got out before Sue got out. I was working at the little Church of God there when I got out of the military. Had another year left before Sue separated. We went back to the States, tried to go to college. It fell through. So we ended up going to Sue's state of residence to go to college. We went to San Antonio, Texas, and we attended University of Texas there at San Antonio. And it was there that we could not find the Church of God again, because it was completely different in the States than what we experienced. So then we went to one of the big churches. You've heard of mega churches? I don't know if you've ever watched cable TV, but John Hagee is on some of those stations. And he has a place called Cornerstone Church down in San Antonio. And so we attended there for a while, because some of the people we knew in Italy go to San Antonio, because there's an Intel site in San Antonio too. And we went there for a while and we decided this is not for us. And that began what's known in some circles as the phantom search for the perfect church. And we began the look and the search. And we were attending this small little Bible study, and it was in somebody's home, and there was a guest that was there. And it was my turn to do the little sharing thing, so I was doing a sharing about communion. And I was talking about how this represents my body, this represents my blood, and onward and so forth. And afterwards, the guy who was visiting pulled me aside and said, you know, I used to be, speaking for himself, he said, I used to be Assemblies of God. And I know that you are Church of God, and you have you put a lot of emphasis, a lot of stock in the Bible. And I said, right. He said, I was wondering if you could show me where it says that. And I said, show you where it says what? Where it says that this represents my body, this represents my blood. So I went to the Gospels, then I went to Corinthians, then I started to get a painful look on my face, and he said, you can't find it, can you? And I said, no, I can't. And he said, that's because it doesn't say that. It says, this is my body, and this is my blood. And that began several weeks, if not months, of interaction with him. And it turns out he was an Orthodox priest who was a reserve chaplain in the Army. And so we talked for a long time. And When I proposed to Sue, I told her I really have discerned that I'm being called to full-time ministry. I don't know what that'll look like or when it'll happen, but that's a discernment that's on my heart. And so now we're talking with this reserve chaplain, and time has gone by, and I still have this call on my life, but he's talking about sacramental liturgical things that you can't do as a Roman Catholic. You can't be married to be a Roman Catholic priest. So okay, the Roman Catholic's out, I'm married. How do I get into this full-time ministry? And he is Orthodox. He said, well, in the Orthodox Church, if you're married before you become a priest, you can be a priest. But if you're a priest, you can't be married. It's one before the other. And I said, well, okay, let's talk more. We talked more about the Orthodox faith. And the next thing I know, we're chrismated in the Orthodox Church, and they're sending us to Nashotah House Episcopal Seminary to learn what they call Western Rite liturgy, which is what we do on a Sunday basis here. So I get to the Episcopal Seminary as an Orthodox candidate for holy orders, and kind of the odd ducks of the 15 people in my class. I'm really the strangest, and we're going along day after day, month after month, and we get to Holy Week. And we adventured our way through Holy Week. And we went through the Palm Sunday liturgy, and we went through the Wednesday, the Thursday, the Friday. We got to the great vigil of Easter on Saturday evening, and it was all we could do. Also, what I could do to wait until Monday to go and talk to the dean about saying, we came here as Orthodox candidates for holy orders, and I really want to talk to you about becoming Episcopal. It doesn't make any sense to us to remain Orthodox and try to start a church someplace and have to explain to everybody in the community what the Orthodox Church is, when the Episcopal Church has these sacraments, has the liturgy, has the theology, and our experience through Lent and through Holy Week was just mind-numbing for us. It was really transformational. And so the dean of the seminary said, well, you're coming from the Orthodox Church, so there's a number of bishops that aren't going to touch you. So let me talk to some. And he talked to one who is no longer part of the Episcopal Church. He left the Episcopal Church, but Jack Eicher was the Bishop of Fort Worth. And they adopted us, and I graduated from seminary as a member of the Diocese of Fort Worth. I went on to work at their cathedral for a number of years, and then discerned a call to the chaplaincy. And went into the Air Force chaplaincy prior to 9/11, and that was kind of my way of segueing away from not just the Orthodox Church in terms of the conservatism, but the Diocese of Fort Worth was going in a completely different direction than the Episcopal Church was. And since then, of course, you probably know that they have left the Episcopal Church. I think they're part of the Antiochian or the Anglican Church in North America or something along those lines. And I still have a lot of really good friends that are in that segment of the Christian faith. But went into the chaplaincy, and that in itself is a completely different animal, because now you're a Air Force chaplain who is a Christian chaplain, who is a Protestant chaplain, who is an Episcopal Protestant Christian chaplain. And I say it that way because the chaplaincy in the Air Force, you are chaplain to everybody. And you're a chaplain first, not an officer first. A chaplain in the Air Force has absolutely zero command authority. In other words, I can't take, if we were, in fact this happened, I was deployed, if we get called into an air raid shelter because something's coming, the senior member, whoever's in that air raid shelter, takes command, and I couldn't do that. And it happened that myself and my base chaplain, who was a full colonel, fall into this air raid shelter, and here's this poor two-striper who has to take command because he was the senior ranking person there that had command authority. We gave him some good advice, but he had to be the one that gave the orders. So you're a chaplain to everybody. And then you're uniquely a Christian chaplain. And then you're uniquely a Protestant Christian chaplain. And then you're uniquely an Episcopal Protestant Christian chaplain. So you have to learn how to meet the needs of those around you. It's not about you, it's about them. And learning how to meet others at their needs. The highlight of and I could spend hours just talking about the chaplaincy, but the highlight was that I was stationed at Ramstein, Germany, where we met all the planes that brought the injured and wounded in from the war in the Gulf. And this is something seminary doesn't train you for, parish life doesn't prepare you for, CPE probably doesn't do a good job unless you are in a real mass casualty type setting where there's a lot of shootings. But that plane lands, and the back end opens up, and you walk in, and there's anywhere from 1 to 60 patients on there, depending upon what the crisis is. If it's a critical care flight, it could be just one person who's alive by life support, and they're getting them back to where they can try to bring stability to them. Or it's a mass casualty flight, and you'll have people that have everything from a broken ankle to they were shot, or they were burned, different aspects of being injured. And when that door opens and you walk onto the plane, you're just absolutely not ready for that. There's nothing really you can do to get prepared for it other than walk in and experience it. And you need to meet people at their need. So you find out what their faith background is. Do they want you to pray with them? How can you pray with them? Sometimes you would get allied forces coming in. I remember one time, Sue was a Russian linguist, and she taught me a few words. There was actually a Russian patient on there, and I made the mistake of asking him how he was in Russian. And then he told me. It didn't dawn on me. I didn't know anything other than ask him how he was. So that wasn't a good idea. I remember one of the flight surgeons. I was waiting for him for one flight, and he handed me a bottle of Vicks. And I said, "What's this for?" And he said, "This is not going to be a good flight. Put some in your nose." And so I did. And it's because the patients that were coming in were burned and really not in good shape. And that was so that we could look beyond our own reactions and still interact with the people. Be able to look them in the eye and not stare at the wounds, and be able to focus on them rather than what the smell is doing to us. So that was a ministry that was unlike anything I've ever experienced, anything like I ever want to experience again, but I wouldn't trade it for anything. It was a necessary, needful thing for those who were coming back, and hopefully we were able to touch some lives. In the time that I was there at Ramstein, I don't know how many planes it was. I was there for a little over 3 years, and I met over 10,000 injured and wounded that came back. So then,
We really should back up and talk about kids.
okay, kids.
We do have 2 kids. Before we went to seminary, we had our babies. We've got 2 daughters, Katie and Rachel. They're now 26 and 24. They were both born in San Antonio. And Rachel was 6 months old when we moved to seminary. So, and we were very blessed to have couples there with us that were also had children the same ages. And so seminary was a great opportunity for us in terms of community and learning how to live. Well, I mean, in the Air Force we had learned to live in community, and so I think that kind of made seminary a little bit easier for us, but we were able to make some really good friendships, and the kids played well with the other kids and had kids that were their age to play with. While we were in seminary, and I'm just going to tease you with this, we discovered that Rachel was born with neither leg in the hip socket, and she walked before we discovered it. She was a very stubborn child, and that worked to her benefit in that regard. And so if you come back next week, we'll tell you a little more in detail, a little bit more of the grace moment involved with her going through her surgeries and kind of how that impacted our lives. Katie and Rachel moved with us everywhere that we moved with the Air Force, and learned to make friends pretty easily, and they were good kids with struggles just like everybody else. They're now married. Rachel is the youngest, 24. She married a year ago, October, and she's now teaching 9th grade science at a little high school outside of Eau Claire, Wisconsin. Katie is the 26-year-old. She married in September, and so they are quite newlyweds. She's finishing up a master's program at Marquette University, and her husband is a financial aid person at a local college, Lawrence University. They like to say they're the, what is it, their phrase? They're the Harvard of the Midwest. I don't know. But anyway, that's, those are our kids.
So, the kids are getting older. I'm in Germany. I'm doing this thing with planes and other things, and I have been deployed once already to one of the places I ended up was Kuwait. And by the way, I never knew, I lived in Texas for a number of years, and I had no idea what hot was till I got to Kuwait. I like to talk about how when we packed out our trucks and we moved, because that's what I did in Green Bay when it was 20 below. When we left Texas to go to seminary, we packed out the U-Haul truck, and it was 105. So there's something about temperature extremes when we move. But when I was in Kuwait, I was going around with a first sergeant. We were on a Gator, which is a glorified golf cart, and we went out to the Patriot missile site to visit the troops out there, and I saw a thermometer hanging in the shade. Now, I don't know how accurate this thermometer was, but you know, the numbers on one side go up to 120, and the hash marks on the other side go up to be over 130, and that's where the little red line was in the shade, was around 130. It was hot. I do know that
it was a dry heat.
It was a dry heat. Very dry heat. The temperature never got below 100, even at night. It stayed above 100 the whole time. I'd turn on, being in the Air Force, we had cable TV, and I'd turn on the TV and I'd see what the temperature was. The extreme temperature in the United States was Death Valley at 108. And I thought, ha! That's like air conditioning. So at any rate, the other thing about Kuwait was they had something called camel spiders. Anybody ever heard of a camel spider? I know you got some critters around here that were telling me about it before the last service, but a camel spider gets to be about this big, and it can outrun you, and they chase you. And I had one chase me. I got off the golf cart and it was coming at me, and I ran around the golf cart, and the first sergeant was already leaving, and I had to dive back on the golf cart, and we got out of Dodge. They're vicious little critters. At any rate, the Air Force was looking to deploy me again. My number was going to come up pretty soon. And the problem with this is that the Army was over-deploying their chaplains. And so the Army was borrowing chaplains from the Air Force. Well, when the Air Force sends you to deploy, they send you to an Air Force base where there's air conditioning and there's cable TV and you get steak at night. And they deploy you for 90 days to 120. And the Army, they take 2 months, 1 month on either end just to get you ready for the deployment. And you're gone for a year to 15 months. And they don't have air conditioning, and they don't have cable TV, and they don't eat steak, and they don't cater well to guys who are 38 or wherever it was I was at that time. And I turned to Sue and I said, I think I feel called back to parish life. That's one aspect of it. The other was the kids were getting to high school age, and I did not want to spend a year away from them deployed with the Army in some sort of setting. And so I separated, and that's when I was called to work with a classmate of mine who was the rector of Christ Church in Bradenton, Florida. Christ Church is a church, I don't know what the number is anymore. I want to say it was 350 to 400 on a Sunday that we did there. And it's very similar to services here. There would be 3 on Sunday, but the first service would be right 1, the second service would be right 2. And so I had 4 years of experience working with Joel down there, and got to work in a program-sized parish in a diocese that was pretty large. And then it was time for me to go out on my own, as it were. Go out and be my own priest as a rector in a parish, and that's when we went up to Green Bay. Katie had just graduated high school. Rachel still had a couple years left, so she was involved in this whole process with us. So we entered the discernment process for a church up in the Green Bay area, and they selected somebody else, but somebody on that team put my name in at St. Anne's in De Pere. And I just agreed to them doing it kind of as a whim. I said, oh, sure, okay. Because this other one was kind of cut and dried. They already knew who they wanted. They were just going through the process to legitimize it. There was not really a search process going on at this first search. And so we went up. Rachel and Sue and I went up to De Pere. We spent a couple of days. We toured. We interviewed. They interviewed us. We interviewed them. And was given the call to go up there in September of 2010. And was there until just this past January. We came down here. Rachel graduated high school there, graduated college over there, and as Sue said, she's now working and she's married, and stayed there for 9 wonderful years. It was really quite a time of learning, a time of growing, a time of becoming comfortable as the rector as opposed to being the associate. I was a pretty good associate. Having had the military time in my background, I knew how to say yes sir, no sir, and those sorts of things. But becoming the person who has to make all the decisions. Again, in the Air Force, I didn't have command authority, so I had to learn how to step into those leadership shoes. And so for the 9 years at Crider at St. Anne's, I had that opportunity. During that time, Sue got to work
wherever I could find a job. When we got out of the Air Force and went back to college, my goal from the time I was, I think, in 3rd grade, I wanted to be a teacher. And so that's when we got out of the Air Force and went back to school. That was my focus. I became a teacher, certified 1st through 6th grade, I think. And then, and we busted through college. We were living on savings that wasn't a lot, and we were motivated, and we finished our bachelor's degrees in just under 3 years. I got done and said I'm not going back to pursue more education until my kids are grown and raised, and we didn't even have kids at the time. I stayed out of school for 1 calendar year before I went back to pursue my master's degree. Went back and got a master's in counseling, so certified to do K through 12 school counseling. And so over the years, as I followed Eric around his career, wherever I could get a job, I alternated between school counseling and classroom teaching for about 14 years, I think I have with education experience. Moved to Wisconsin and could not break in. Just could not get, I don't even know how many applications I filled out. I don't know how many interviews I did, and I just couldn't break through. And people would say, go be a substitute teacher. When I was in college, one of my professors said I'd rather pick up trash than be a substitute teacher. And I think I really absorbed that and agreed with it. I'm just a little bit of a control freak. I'm not a great control freak, but I'm just enough that I didn't feel like I had enough control in the classroom without knowing, what the rules were or whatever. So I was not willing to be a substitute teacher. And so I prayed hard when we left Florida, the right job at the right time. That was my prayer. Eric and Rachel moved in September so that she could get started with school, and Katie and I stayed behind in Florida. I was teaching at the time, and Katie was in her 1st year of college. And so we thought, well, we'll spend a year apart, and that'll be okay. By October, I was going, this is not great. And by November, I knew I needed to move. My thought process was I needed to get there to be in the Green Bay area to be able to interview for jobs for the coming year. But again, the right job at the right time. And didn't find much. Decided to walk through the mall. I'll do retail. I've never done retail. I walked through the mall on a Sunday afternoon. Gap Kids had a sign out saying that they were hiring. Monday morning, I get up early, I fill out their online application. By 9 o'clock, the manager of Gap, not Gap Kids, was calling, asking me if I would like to come in for an interview. And I was going to take Katie to Minnesota. She had been accepted to the University of Minnesota, and this was the summer. Yeah, it had to have been around September, August, September. I said, if you want to interview me, I've got, like this afternoon, and then I'm headed to Minnesota. And she's like, okay, come on in. So by 2 o'clock on Monday afternoon, I'm in for a job interview, and I'm driving Katie to Minnesota when I get the job offer. And I was like, really, God? This is what you got for me? Minimum wage, retail employment, okay. And so that's what I did. And I think I worked for them for 4 years. And did other things along the way. A position opened up at the church for me to do youth ministry, which was awesome because that's, getting to play with kids, talk to them about God loving them, not having to do report cards, parent-teacher conferences, lesson plans. It was the best of everything. Did that for 5 years, I think. And then fell into a job with a program called the Ecumenical Partnership for Housing. And it's a little nonprofit, local to Green Bay, unique to Green Bay, a partnership of 21 area churches that provides transitional housing to folks coming out of homelessness. So they live in the houses, 20 homes that we provided throughout Green Bay, rent-free, fully furnished, no bills, and some intense case management through the Salvation Army to get them back on their feet so that they can go out and really have a good start. My lesson in that was, I think, for the 14 years that I was teaching and counseling, that defined who I was. That's who I was. If you talked to me for 5 minutes, you knew that I was in education. And my lessons in Green Bay were that wasn't who I was. That was what I did. So it was a real blessing to get to be in the nonprofit world and see a little bit more about struggles that real people have on a daily basis.
So I think we're going to end it there, and we'll save our grace moments for next week, and how we got here is a grace moment in and of itself, so we'll save that story for next week as well. So are there any quick questions that we might be able to entertain?
What was your relationship with the Episcopal bishop when you were in the Air Force?
My relationship with the Episcopal bishop when I was in the Air Force was that canonically I was still basically resident in Fort Worth, but to get on active duty in the Air Force or in the military as an Episcopal priest, you have to meet the examining board of chaplains for I think the title now is the Bishop Suffragan for chaplaincies. It used to be the Bishop Suffragan for the Armed Forces when I went in. At that time it was Bishop George Packard. And he would provide guidance and oversight from the military point of view. So if anything happened with me within the context of the military, he would be my reporting bishop. If anything happened to me with respect to holy orders, it would be the bishop that was back in Fort Worth. In the Episcopal Church, you have to be a ordained priest and have had 2 years parish ministry before you're eligible to be considered to go into the military as a chaplain. And there is one of the priests here in this diocese, Jerry Blackburn, is retired. I think he's living in the Wilmington area. He was one of my examining chaplains at the time. In fact, he was kind of the canon to the ordinary for the Bishop Suffragan.
You know that he's done a lot of society.
He's been here?
Oh,
Oh,
yes.
yes. The stories I could tell you. Other questions?
When were you actually ordained?
When was I ordained? I was ordained a deacon in June of 1998, and then priested. I waited a little while until January of 1999. I didn't want to be ordained right around the Christmas rush, so we waited until the next year.
Did it sit well with your Catholic parents?
Yes,
That's what
because
they'll be here in March.
after I went into the Air Force, they left the Catholic Church, and for reasons that are probably too broad to go into here. And now they have been living in Myrtle Beach for the last 30 years, give or take, and they were attending a Presbyterian church down there. And my father is still at heart very much liturgical, very much sacramental, and very much about communion. So he will be very excited to join us next month. And my mom will enjoy it as well. Yes?
Sue, being from Texas, what happened to your accent? And second of all, What happened to your middle name?
Susan Gale. Still very much intact. So what happened to my accent? When you spend 8 hours a day, 5 days a week, for a year, learning a foreign language, with a lot of other people that are Yankees, your accent warps. And so it's really kind of strange because when I'm up north, people say, "Where are you from?" You know, and they think it's a pretty strong Texas accent. My family disowns me. I talk funny to them. So, yeah, so that's what happened to my accent, Russian language training.
When Sue's dad calls, occasionally I'll answer the phone and it's him. It takes me a while to understand what he's saying. He has a strong accent. Any other questions? One more?
Yeah, what's your vision for St. Philip's?
What's that?
What is your future vision?
We'll save that for next week. That's part of the grace moments.
Great 9 years to be in Green Bay.
They were okay.
Yeah, they did well.
I got there, they won a Super Bowl, they fired their coach and I left. I don't know what they're in for store now. All right, thank you everybody. We will see you next week and we will pick up with grace moments. Okay.